Chapter 12. Trouble with his uncle. A big land and livestock dispute among the heirs of Church's grandparents, Edward Daniel and Susan Hancock, led to a long-term trouble in the family. The couple had a 118-acre tract of land in the New Harmony community on the road, which is currently the Hugh Allison Road, going to what is now the ABC subdivision. Edward and Susan's home and 118 acres joined Church's and Mary's home and 46.3 acres. After Edward Daniel died in 1916, their son Lafayette Fate Hancock lived with his mother on this home place. He continued living there after she died in 1920. 5 or 6 years later, the heirs had still not settled on the division of property and livestock. Sometime between 1925 and 1927, Fate and some of the other heirs devised a plan to divide the assets and were planning on auctioning to sell the cattle. Several other heirs objected to the way Fate was trying to divide the assets and asked Church to join their cause to stop him. Church was successful in stopping the cattle sale, and he also took some of the heirs to Pikeville to check on the legality of the way Fate and his side were dividing the property and the livestock. When Fate discovered what Church was doing, he became very upset with his nephew. The infuriated Fate rushed to Church's home and asked Church's wife where he was. Mary told him, "Church had gone to Morgan Springs." Fate said, "You've seen Church for the last time. I'm going to kill him." When Church returned home, Mary told him what his Uncle Fate had said. Shortly afterward, Fate and Church ran into each other on a nearby road. Fate was a big man who was very strong. Fate started the action by hitting Church with his fist, but the younger man was quick. Church pulled his pocket knife and defended himself by cutting Fate. His uncle continued to fight back for several minutes, but the more he fought back, the more Church cut him all over his body. Fate's son Walter came along after several minutes and hit Church over the head with his shotgun. Church took Walter's shotgun away, and evidently he didn't wish to kill any of his close relatives, so he just took the gun away. Taylor Clark, whose home was near the fight, finally came to Fate's rescue. By that time, Church was the overwhelming winner. Taylor had a shotgun on Church, told him to stop and leave Fate alone, and ordered him to leave the scene. Church looked at Clark, grinned, and walked away. Clark helped Fate get back to his home. Fate lived with several scars on his face and on his back for the remainder of his life as a result of his fight with Church. A few days later, Church visited Wilbur Knight in Beatty Cove in the valley. Wilbur's mother was peeling apples, and Church offered to help her peel. She asked him, "How do you know your knife's clean?" Church smiled and quickly replied, "It ought to be clean. I hung it into a Hancock the other day." Dr. Dion Greer made the trip out to Fate's house 2 times a day for 2 weeks to attend to his knife wounds, which terribly disfigured his face. It took all of Fate's inheritance to pay his extensive doctor bills. Fate started a process of filing a damage lawsuit against Church for his pain and suffering from his knife wounds and for all of his medical expenses. John Henry Boring, who was a good friend and a close relative of both Church and Fate, acted as a mediator. John Henry worked out a compromise settlement in which Church agreed to pay his Uncle Fate a nominal amount of money for his medical expenses. Fate agreed to the settlement. Later, a lawsuit was filed in Bledsoe County Chancery Court on October the 29th, 1927, concerning this 118 acres of land owned by the heirs of Edward Daniel and Susan Hancock. A decree was rendered in case number 930 at the March 1928 term of court, commanding the clerk and master to sell the land. The official sold the 118 acres to Church Lester for $500 per deed book 16, page 316. Evidently, Church was the higher bidder. A year or 2 later, in 1928, Fate and his son Walter became involved in a deadly feud with Bob Corder, reportedly to have been a cruel person and a drunk who lived nearby. All 3 were allegedly stealing items from a well-to-do family from Florida who owned a summer home and a property at Guerin Heights on Walden's Ridge. These 3 men started telling others what had been stolen. This loose talk of accusing one another of stealing started a feud between the two Hancocks on one side and Bob Corder on the other. At this time, Hubert Boring was working for church. He lived near the Hancocks in Guerin Heights. Both Hancocks had made threats against Bob Corder to Hubert. A few days later, Bob stopped Hubert and showed him his pearl-handled .45 pistol. Bob asked Hubert if he had heard Fate and Walter talking about him. Using a white lie, Hubert told Bob no, because he didn't want to see any one of the three get hurt. Bob then told Hubert he was going to kill Walter. The Hancocks saw Bob talking to Hubert, and when Hubert stopped work that afternoon, the Hancocks stopped Hubert and asked him if the SOB said anything about them. Again, Hubert told a white lie by saying no. Hubert helped keep trouble down between the Hancocks and Bob Corder for about 6 months, before it came to a deadly climax. The feud continued to simmer and boil until August 11th, 1928, where the Hancocks were following Bob Corder on the New Harmony Road near where Warren Wooden's apple barn is now located. They intended to kill him, but Bob saw him coming toward him and jumped into a ditch. He fired his shotgun loaded with buckshot, and he hit Walter in the heart, killing him instantly. Another shot hit Fate's Prince Albert tobacco can in his overall bib pocket. A newspaper article said Fate was seriously injured, but the shot glanced off his tobacco can, probably saving his life. A few years prior to the trouble in 1923, there was a big fight near the Rigsby Elementary School site between Fate Hancock, his son Walter, and his nephew Hubert Boring on one side, and Taylor Clark and his 3 sons, Bill, Jay, and Leonard, on the other side. Hubert was only 17 years old at the time. He was riding in a T-model Ford with Henry Wooden. They stopped on the road about 100 yards from the school. Bill Clark, who lived nearby, got in the car and beat up Hubert. Walter Hancock happened to be close by and tried to come to Hubert's rescue. Bill's father, Taylor Clark, slapped Walter and spun him around for trying to help Hubert. Heading home to get a shotgun, Walter ran into his father, Fate. Fate was a moonshiner, and he'd just come back from delivering a load of moonshine. Walter told Fate about his trouble with Bill and Taylor Clark. Walter got his shotgun, and his father, Fate, had his pistol in his pocket, as they both mounted the same horse and rode to the trouble spot. When they arrived, Taylor tried to draw a shotgun, but Fate took it away from him and whipped Taylor good with his fist. The beating Fate administered was so severe that it broke Taylor's shoulder. When Jay Clark tried to enter the fight to help his father, Walter knocked Jay down several times with his shotgun. Jay kept coming after Walter. Walter finally pointed his shotgun at Jay and told him, "If you come any closer, I'll kill you." As the fighting died down, Fate asked Taylor Clark, "Didn't you know you couldn't whip me?" Taylor said, "Yeah, I knew that." Fate said, "Then why did you want to try it?" Then Taylor Clark's son Leonard came out of Clark's yard, drunk and hollering, "Trouble!" Leonard tried to take away his father's shotgun to shoot Fate Hancock. Taylor then asked for help to keep his drunken son from taking his shotgun because his shoulder was broken. Fate Hancock spoke up and said, "Go ahead, let him have the shotgun." Fate had his pistol in his pocket and knew he could shoot the drunken Leonard before Leonard could shoot him. Taylor Clark brought charges against Fate Hancock for breaking his shoulder. Hubert Bourne was summoned to testify, but he didn't want to go to court. When he heard about the summons, he went to Florida for about 2 years in order to avoid testifying. Bledsoe County Sheriff Thomas J. Swafford finally got the matter resolved with Judge Darr. Fate was born in 1883, and he died of natural causes in 1962. He was said to have been an extremely hard worker.